Hello everyone, I'm going to be making this video on how to change your front fork oil on a 2014 Yamaha V Star Deluxe. Now this is the 1300 Deluxe. I'm pretty sure that's all they made for the Deluxe model, but I'm just going to go through and show you some of the things that we got to do. The first thing we've got to do is we've got to remove the front wheel, the front brake calipers, the front fender, and your reflector bracket. Now it's pretty straightforward operation. There's not too many bolts you got to take apart for this. You have a pinch bolt on one side of the fork. That'll be on the right hand side of the motorcycle. You have your axle bolt. You have your axle spacers. You have your brake caliper bolts in here, and you have your one brake hose bracket bolt just in behind here. To get the fenders off, there's going to be two bolts just on the inside of the fender here, and then we'll go into removing the forks from the motorcycle. So basically all you're going to do first is you're going to remove your brake calipers first, then you're going to remove your front wheel, then the front fender. And it's pretty straightforward, just like most other motorcycles out there. So I'll go ahead and get that done, and then we'll go over on how to remove the forks from the bike. A quick summary of some of the supplies you're going to need to do fork oil change. Is a drain pan. You're going to need a clean tabletop to lay out your fork spring and some parts. Shop rags, 22mm wrench, 19mm wrench. You're going to need a fork oil gauge. These are super handy. You can buy these online. They're like 20 bucks from Motion Pro. A couple other manufacturers make them. I just happen to have some old tubing and connections around my garage, so I just made my own. You'll need an 8mm socket and a 12mm socket. You're going to need a measuring cup. We'll go over that later. Rubber gloves. Going to need some fork oil. I'm going to be using Bel-Ray high performance 10 weight. 10 weight is what the manufacturer recommends, so we'll put that back in there. That's what most of the motorcycle shops around town carry, is the Bel-Ray measuring device. You need a 6mm Allen wrench, an 8mm Allen wrench, possibly a dead blow hammer, but probably not. Set of calipers for taking some measurements, and some gloves, paper towels, and I'll let you know if I run into anything else along the way. So before you remove the front wheel and begin to take apart your brakes and brackets and so forth and fender, you need to have the motorcycle front end jacked up. I'm pretty lucky. I've got the motorcycle lift still set up, and scissor jack underneath the front frame. As you can see there, you need to be able to get this front wheel off, and the only way to do that is to jack up the motorcycle. If you're going to do this on the ground, that's fine. Just make sure that it's stable. It's not going to tip over or fall over on you. Another quick tip is I did tie my handlebars back. That's just going to make it a whole bunch easier getting the wheel off and getting the forks out, just so stuff's not moving around on you. Cover up your fuel tank. We do have to loosen this fork cap before we get the forks out, and I'll show you that a little bit later. But other than that, we're good to go now. All right, we're back. I got my front wheel removed, and the front fender removed, and the front calipers removed. So I like to keep everything pretty organized. All the right-hand side parts go on the right-hand side, and all the left-hand parts go on the left-hand side. Everything's pretty standard, all 12mm for all the fasteners. The front reflector, I think that's an 8mm bolt on there. It kind of gets in the way of one of the bolts, so I just took it off. And don't lose your brake silencer clips, or else you'll end up buying a whole new set. And there's also one in your caliper here. Do yourself a favor, support your brake calipers with like a bungee cord or a piece of rope or something. You don't want to hang your calipers off your brake hoses. That's just bad news for the crimped ends. You're just adding a whole bunch of extra stress on the system there. So just protect your brake hoses, hang them up. Now this is the pinch bolt. I just took it all the way out because it doesn't need to be in there. Front axle bolt and the left side spacer and the right side spacer. I put a felt marker on the outside edge so I know that that mark goes on towards the outside of the wheel. But you can probably tell the dirty side is outside and the clean side is the inside facing the rim. Here's the wheel. Now is a good time to inspect your wheel seals to make sure that they're in good condition. Everything looks good so far here. Brake rotors look good. So now we'll get into removing the front forks. All right. Before you remove your front forks, take a quick measurement and write it down of how much fork you got sticking out of your upper clamp. Looks like mine's about 2 millimeters. The service manual says you can install these flush. I kind of like the way they are now. I'm pretty sure these forks have never been done since I've owned the motorcycle anyways, or even the previous owner. So I'm just going to keep it the same. I put a little felt marker there for future reference as well. This is 6 millimeter Allen key, and you just basically got to loosen this. You don't have to take it all the way out if you don't want to. So I'm going to go ahead and write down my measurement of approximately 2 millimeters, and it's exactly the same on the other side. And that's what we want to reinstall them to that same measurement. So both forks are even, and the spring rate will be even on both sides. Okay, I've loosened this 6 millimeter Allen key bolt, and it just needs to be loose, and that'll release the upper clamp off the fork tube. Before you loosen your lower clamp, it's a good idea to loosen this about a turn and a half, or else you'll end up having to clamp your fork tubes in a fork vise or even a bench vise with soft jaw protectors. So we'll go ahead and just loosen this guy. That's why I covered my tank. I don't want to like bang my wrench up against the tank, so we'll just loosen this guy just enough so that it turns fairly freely. And that'll make it much easier to remove your fork tube cap when we get it on the bench. We're going to loosen the lower clamp. Now I've loosened the upper bolt. There's two in here. They're an 8 millimeter Allen key. If you're doing this job yourself, you want to put something underneath this fork here so it doesn't come flying out at you or fall out and somehow damage it. So I've just got a jack stand here, and it's got a fair bit of clearance under it still, so it's just going to make sure it doesn't fall out and on me there and fall on the floor or something like that. So we'll just loosen this lower clamp bolt here, and should be able to slide the fork out. There we go. Move your jack stand out of the way. Just kind of wiggle. And she'll come slide. There we go. And that's what it looks like when you remove it from the motorcycle. All right, we got our fork clamped in my little workbench here. It's just a little Black & Decker workbench. You can clamp it into a vise if you have a vise. Just make sure it's clamped in something to hold it for you. It's going to make life a little easier. So everything looks good. I don't have any fork seal leakage or any sweating or anything like that. So keep in mind that this video is just going to be fork oil change. I'm not going to do any seals or anything like that. So we already loosened our fork top cap in the motorcycle, so it's good to go. Good tip is put one of your shop rags over top there, and that'll prevent any oil from squirting out at you, and if any parts come flying out, you're going to be able to catch them. So just put you can't turn this by your hand, just grab another socket, Turn until it becomes easy. Now you want a slightly downward pressure on here because that fork spring is always pushing up. So I can feel it now, or I can turn this by hand. So I'm just going to turn this by hand, applying just a little bit of downward pressure. And I can just start to feel it there. The fork cap is loose. So inside the fork, now you're gonna have to hang on to this guy here. It's gonna want to slide down on you. Inside there, here's our fork top cap. Inside here is going to be your fork spacer. And then further down there, just let this inner tube slide down. About there. Or until you can reach your fork spring. So, fork spring washer. Place it on your workbench there so the same side goes back in. And fork spring. So this is where your shop rakes come in handy. These kind of are covered in oil. So we're just going to pull that out and set it on our workbench. Here's the parts laid out for you. We've got our fork spring, washer, spacer, and fork top cap. So I'm going to go ahead and get those all cleaned up and ready to reinstall. Make sure you take a really good look at your O-ring here. Make sure it's in really good shape to go back in or reuse it. If not, just put a new one on. The last thing you want to do is get all this work done and then stupid O-ring starts leaking or something like that. So the next step is to dump out the old fork oil. And I'm just going to measure how much oil I dump out. Since we're not doing a complete rebuild, the specification they give you in the service manual is for a rebuild, which is about 490 milliliters of oil. So I'm going to dump it out, see how much I can get out, and that way I know how much to put back in. And we'll also have to set the oil level, and that's with the special tool I made earlier. But I'll show you that when we get there. So here's the old oil. It actually looks pretty good. It doesn't look terrible at all. So you just hang her upside down and just gently stroke your forks if you can. That's going to try to get most of the oil out of the system from the damper. And that's about all we're going to get out of it, I think, without taking the whole fork apart, which I'm not going to do this go around, so we'll see what that looks like there. You only need a couple strokes. The damper doesn't hold very much oil, so we just want to get as much out as we can of the old stuff. And here we have it. And it looks like about 420 milliliters or so. So there's probably still a little bit of oil trapped in there. So basically when it comes time to refill this fork, you got to put about that same amount back in. I'm going to do a flush, so I'm going to put in probably 200 milliliters and cycle my fork up and down to kind of flush out that damper which sits at the bottom of your fork. Alright, so I've already completed the flush, and basically all I did was added 200 mils of brand new fork oil. I stroked the fork a few times to circulate the oil through the damper and everything, just to flush out any extra old oil or anything like that, and I drained it all out again. I'm going to pre-measured out the brand new fork oil. And I'm going to add the 490. And the reason I'm going to do that is to make sure that I've got enough oil in there and I don't have to like top it up per se when it comes time to set the oil level, which will be the next step. So we'll go ahead and pour this in. When you're pouring this in, pour it down the side per se. That's going to help reduce the amount of air bubbles in your oil. And there we go. We can kind of start to see some of the air bubbles coming out of it. When you start this, your inner tube is going to want to fall down anyway, so it's okay to have this all the way down. That's where you have to have it anyways to set your oil level. So we'll just let the air percolate out of this thing. You can kind of see the air bubbles coming up now. And while it's doing that, you want to circulate the new oil through your damper. So to do that, you just have to stroke your fork cylinders all the way to the top and then back down. Do this three times and check for air bubbles floating to the top. That's what we want to see. And we'll do this a couple times to make sure that that damper is right full of oil. And now we'll just let it sit. Most people I've talked to, they say just let it sit for half hour or so, an hour. Make sure you get all that air out of there before we set the fork oil level. So, good idea just to pump it up and down. Get that oil circulating through your damper rod. This fork's been sitting for about an hour while I went ahead and did the other side there, the other fork. And you just want to stroke this a couple more times. You'll be able to see the oil bubbles floating to the top. I've already done that, and it looks good. So the next step here is to set the oil level. So you want to start with the inner tube all the way down. And then you can buy these tools online, or you can just make one. I just made this one because I had the extra stuff laying around. So you want 105 millimeters from the tip to the bottom of this washer, and the same thing applies to the ones you would buy at your motorcycle shop or order them online or whatnot. So that's the specification for oil level for the Yamaha V Star 1300. So to start with the inner tube all the way down to the very bottom. And how this works is you would just set this so it's flush. Your fork has to be level or vertical on both sides. And then your oil level is set correctly when you start sucking air. If you suck air right away, that means your oil level is too low. So that's why we added a little bit extra oil, so we know when our oil level is set properly. So you just pull back on the syringe until you get your oil level set correctly. Try to hold it up so you can see it a little better. There you go. So that's what you want to see. You want to see a big gulp of air in this level tool. We'll do it once more just to show you again. There you go. See? Hardly anything out of it. So now our oil level is set correctly. We can go ahead and reassemble the fork. So I've got all my parts cleaned up here. Everything looks good. There's no rust. There's no junk or anything on them, so looks good. These are constant rate springs. If someone had put progressive springs in your motorbike, there'd be probably a pack of springs either at the top or the bottom, where the coils would be really close together, but these are the factory constant rate ones. So as you took it out, you want to put it back in the same way. And it's kind of hard to tell if you do forget about it, because they're exactly the same on both sides, but best practice is the way it came out is the way it goes back in. So that's what we're going to do here. And just nice and slow, don't drop it in there. You don't want to splash yourself with oil. And then you have your washer. Same thing, goes back in the same way it came out. Drop that guy in there. And the next step is your spring spacer. And that just goes in there like so. Once you have your components reinstalled, take some grease and lube up this O-ring here. You don't want this O-ring to bind on you when you're putting your fork back together and then kink it or something like that. Then that's going to make life not so good, because then you got to take it all apart again and change O-ring. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to slide this inner tube all the way up. And then I'm going to use slight downward force to get this started to go back a turn until you feel the threads line up. Once you feel the threads line up, start turning this in nice and slow. You don't want to cross thread this, or else you'll be purchasing new forks. So just nice and slow until you get her to where that O-ring is just inside there. You can get a wrench on her. There we go. So just using our 22 mil wrench again, we're just going to snug this down as much as we can by hand. There we go. Now we're ready to torque this guy down and reinstall the fork in the motorcycle. All right, to torque this, we're going to cheat a little bit using a strap wrench. These are available in different sizes and whatnot. The reason I'm going to do it this way is because once we get it in the motorcycle, without taking the handlebars off, it's really difficult to get at this. So the torque spec is only 17 foot-pounds. So I'm going to use a strap wrench to hold it from turning, being careful not to damage the inner tube. And we're just going to torque this top cap down until we get it tight. There we go. Now it's ready for reinstallation into the motorbike. Okay, so now we're ready for reinstallation into the motorcycle. This is the right side. I'm just facing the motorcycle this way, so I'm calling this the right side. And this is the one without the pinch bolt. So that goes on this side. Even if you wanted to install these backwards, you can't, because then your brake calipers, brackets, mounting brackets will be on the top rather than the bottom. So it's kind of nice to have a helper for this, but if you don't, it's okay. But you just want to make sure your inner tube is nice and clean before you put it back in. And just wiggle it until you slide it all the way back up, until you get just inside the lower, or sorry, just inside this lower fork cover. Now I've already got my Allen key sitting in there, and that measurement we took earlier of how much gap there is up top here, we're going to strive for the exact same measurement. So with one hand, wiggle your fork up until you get to where you need to be, and then just tighten this couple turns and tighten. That'll hold it. You can put the jack stand back under here just in case it does fall out. And we're just going to check and see to make sure that we're at that 2 millimeters where we were before. That looks good. So now you can just tighten the rest of these guys down. The lower clamp I always going to do first. So there. And we'll do the upper clamp, and then it's the same procedure for the other side. 17 foot-pounds for the top, remember. It's to reset your torque wrench. Here's a little bit of a close-up on why I torqued these out of the motorcycle. To get on there with a decent torque wrench, you got to remove your handlebars. And that kind of looks like a pain. So if you can get a strap wrench and torque this top cap, do it while you got the fork out of the motorcycle. Or you can use what they call a crow's foot. You can get a crow's foot end on there, do your calculation for torque, and then do it that way as well. All right, there we have it. Both forks are back installed in the motorcycle. Everything went quite well. Just take the time now to clean up and polish up your forks. It does appear that they are clear coated, so don't use an abrasive polish on these unless they're starting to show signs of corrosion and whatnot. So all I did with mine was just a little bit of car wax, get them all cleaned up and shined up and ready for the fender. All right, the front fender is back on. Now all we have to do is torque the fender bolts, and those are 17 foot-pounds. Now it's time to install the front wheel assembly. Now it's very important that you put this back on the way it came off as well, because motorcycle tires are inherently directional. So if it has an arrow on it like this one does here, I don't know if you can see that in this light, see right there? That's the directional arrow, and we want to install this back on the motorcycle with the same direction, right? So these are the wheel seals. They look good on both sides. And to reinstall your spacers, get them nice and clean. Remember, before I put that mark on the outside, just put a little bit of grease, doesn't have to be a whole bunch, on your wheel spacer. And then gently insert it into there, and we'll just do the same on the other side. All right, now it's time for the axle bolt. Do the same thing. Clean off your axle bolt, make sure there's no dirt and grime, and take off any of the old grease. Just give it a light coat of fresh grease. All you're doing really is preventing any corrosion if moisture gets in there. Don't goop it on there because that's going to affect your torque values. And don't put it all over the threads either. All you're looking for is just to coat it. And then we'll go ahead and get the front wheel put on. Put your front axle in like so, and then it's just a matter of installing the front wheel assembly. There we go, we got the front wheel installed. 53 foot-pounds for your axle bolt, and 17 foot-pounds for the pinch bolt. As you can see, everything looks good. Give your wheel a spin just to make sure there's no resistance. And there we go. We'll get to putting the brakes back on. Alright, just about there. I've got everything torqued down for the axle nut and the pinch bolt. I've got my brake caliper brackets on. These bolts here are 30 foot-pounds. And now we're going to mount the brake pads and the reflector, 5 foot-pounds if you really want to know. And then we're just going to reapply some brake lubricant and some anti-seize to these caliper bolts. So just clean them quick like. Steel and aluminum sometimes aren't the best of friends, so just a very small amount on the threads of anti-seize. That'll stop them from sticking into the aluminum later on. So just a very small amount. There we go. And then for the caliper bolts, I like to put on brake lubricant. This is just Ultra Slick Permatex synthetic brake lubricant. So you don't need to like goop it all over the place. You just need a small amount on each one. And then you just do that for both sides. go. Brake calipers installed. Not much to tell you. 20 foot-pounds, 20 foot-pounds. Same for both sides. The brake pads can only go in one way. Just make sure you put them back in, pardon me, the same way as you took them out. Just, it's kind of the general rule. All that's left to do now is just reattach your brake hose to the bracket and put the reflector back on. There we go, we're all done. Everything went really well, nice and smooth. I didn't have any issues. Just final inspection. Before you take your bike out and ride, make sure you didn't have any twists end up in your brake hoses or anything like that. Make sure they're all nice and straight. Make sure they're not binding on anything. Looks all good there. All you should hear is just the normal drag of your brake pads. And it feels really good. Same thing on the other side. Just make sure that you're not seeing any twists or kinks or anything like that in your brake hoses. And yeah, that's all good. These bolts here, they're pretty small. They're just an 8mm bolt, so hand tight is good. Hand tight for that. And now all there is left to do is go for a ride. So I'll take it out for a ride when the roads get better, and then I'll double check the bolts here after the fact and make sure that they retain their torque values. Before you go out and ride though, pump your front brakes, because you'll end up pushing the caliper pistons back in slightly when you take the calipers off or even installing them. So just for safety, just lightly pump your brakes, give her a nice hard push. Now your brakes are pumped up and you're ready to ride.